Okay, our next guest used to be in the assembly. His name is Mike Gatto. He is an attorney, and he's also he wants to talk about the fact that he is a Democrat, was a Democrat in the assembly, and is very pro Second Amendment. And I think that there is definitely a stereotype and maybe an earned stereotype that Democrats are not pro Second Amendment. But it's not always true. Just like not every Republican is pro Second Amendment, not every Democrat is anti Second Amendment. So I wanted him to come on and talk about it, have a really good conversation, and see if he can give us some arrows for the quiver. So, Mike, how you doing, man?
I'm doing great. It's good to be here.
Good, good, good. So let's start. So first off, you're an attorney, right?
Yeah, I am the two most popular professions, right? I'm a politician and an attorney, so everybody hates me. I mean, it is like, I suppose if I threw in used car salesman, I would have the trifecta. But yeah,
Yeah,
it's
really.
bad. It's
Yeah,
bad.
no kidding. So when you got out of law school, what made you want to go into politics?
Well, when I got out of law school, I was actually practicing law, helping private sector companies that had challenges with the government, and that's where you say, "Gosh, doesn't everybody?" Right?
Yeah, really.
But I did that for a number of years, and then, there was a vacancy in the legislative seat where I grew up. So my district was Hollywood, Los Angeles, Silver Lake, Los Feliz, Glendale, Burbank, that part of California. And the guy who represented that district decided, that he wanted to move on to other things. So there's a vacancy in the middle of the term, and, against my better judgment and against my wife's express desires, I decided to run. And by some miracle, I won. And I won 7 more elections, and I served 4 terms in the California legislature.
Wow. Now, that's a competitive district to jump into as, being brand new into politics. One of the things that I tell people is, when people who serve in Sacramento or Washington D.C., it's not usually their first job in politics. They usually start out on a school board and maybe go to
Yeah.
city council and then move into the
Yeah.
assembly. But you went right into the assembly and in a district where I would say there are a lot of heavy hitters. There's a lot of
Yeah.
people that were probably going for that job. What made you different? How were you able to
Boy,
be
hey,
successful?
kudos to you for knowing that, because a lot of people think, like, you still encounter, like, very educated billionaires who think, "Gee, I'm just gonna run for the Senate and,
I
as my
can't tell
first
you.
job," or I'm.
I can't tell you how many candidates I've run into, and it's like a total vanity thing.
Yep,
They're
for sure.
rich or they're whatever, they're famous, they're bored, or they're married to somebody who's rich and famous and bored, and they just
So true.
decide that for their own, vanity, they're going to run for office. I would imagine in your district, there's a lot of that. So for you to be able to rise above and win, how did that happen?
So I think it was a lot of luck. I think people diminish the value of luck in politics, but it's funny that you mentioned that, because I ran against the president of the school board in the biggest city in my district, which was 40% of my district. I ran against 2 different presidents of the school board in 3 different elections, and by some miracle, I beat him every time. It's, yeah, usually it's people who hold local office. I like to think that I got elected because I out-hustled folks. I worked very, very, very hard, and on top of that, I was 2 other things. I was accessible, and I tried to be authentic, and what I mean by that is, if somebody shot me an email
Hmm.
and they said, "There's a super controversial bill. It's the most controversial bill going through Sacramento right now. How are you gonna vote for it?" I would say, "I'm gonna vote yes," or "I'm gonna vote no." And they'd be like, "I'm so shocked you responded. I'm so shocked you told me how you were gonna vote." And I guess a lot of people, they don't respond, or they respond with, like, "Well, I'm considering both sides and this and that." It's like,
Yeah.
"This is how I'm gonna vote." And, they always told me my district appreciated that. They told me that by the time I left the legislature, I was getting 58,000 emails a year,
Jeez.
and that was the most of anybody in the assembly.
Wow.
And I think it's because the people who lived there knew that if they contacted me, I would write them back.
Okay, so you ran as a Democrat, and it was a heavy Your district was heavy Democrat, right?
Well, it's interesting. When I was growing up, the district was Republican, and it was Republican until 1996. And then it was like the closest seat in the state of California. And then it started getting more and more Democratic as the years have gone by. There are some conservative parts of my old district, North Glendale, for example, places like that. Burbank used to be very conservative, not so much anymore. But yeah, now, it's a heavily Democratic seat now.
So a heavily Democratic seat. What made you a Democrat?
Well, so when I was growing up, I was always explained that the Democratic Party was the party that believes in a fair shake for everybody. That's simple. That if you work hard, you pay your taxes, you keep your nose clean, you don't get in trouble, that the Democratic Party believes in a fair deal for you. And that's what made my dad a Democrat. That's what made me a Democrat. And I believe that is still the promise, the central promise of the Democratic Party. I also believe that, frankly, the Democratic Party has lost its way in many cases. I think that we've forgotten this, like, hey, let's look out for the working man. And it's now all these other random things, right? And I think we do best when we just try to say, hey, we're here for an America for everybody. And that's what we're fighting for.
So when did you leave office again? Remind me what year?
January 1, 2017.
2017.
Yeah, well, end of 2016. Yeah, 20.
Okay. And so do you feel like when you left, were you more or less Democrat, when you left office than when you started, or were you about the same?
Great question. So you had a couple things going on. Well, you had three things going on simultaneously as I was leaving office. Number one, you had me aging, right? And I think as people age, it's natural for them to be more skeptical of every new idea that someone floats. Number two, you had the rise of Trump. You had the country breaking into these very polarized camps where it feels more polarized than in recent years, or the times preceding it. Number three, you did have the Democratic Party going through some profound uh, existential. I don't want to say growing pains because it's an old party, but you definitely have. I think even today, you have a battle for control of the Democratic Party. So I felt sometimes and look, I think every eclectic voting lawmaker feels like this, regardless of party. There were times when I was in Sacramento where I voted no on a Democratic bill. We took 2,500 votes every year, roughly. Okay. And I was always amazed when the headline would come out and it would be like, there's three members of the legislature who didn't vote no on a single bill all year.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, I'm lucky to have 10 good ideas in a year. I can't imagine 2,500 ideas and there wasn't one that you had a problem with. So, I voted no, probably. Well, okay. The statistics show that I voted no more than any other Democrat in my last year in office.
And most of the bill, let's be honest, most of the bills that make it through the process were originated by a Democratic member of the Assembly or Senate.
Yeah, no, if a bill makes it to the floor of either house in California in modern times, then it has been approved by the majority party.
Yeah, I've even seen cases where a Republican will present an idea, and try to, form a bill basically, and they kill it and then steal the idea and and put it into their bill, and then boom, it becomes a Democratic bill. But
so your knowledge of California politics is significantly advanced compared to the average person I talk to in the media. That is a practice that I hate, by the way. It's like we used to say, Democrats in Sacramento used to say, we want Republican lawmakers to be more engaged.
Yeah.
And one of them would have a great idea. And then it'd be like, all right, we're going to kill your bill. So go golf the rest of the year. And we're going to and it's like that. No, that's not right. It's not morally right. It's not ethically right. And it's also not good for that person represents 500,000 Californians just like I do. And if they had an idea, they should have the right to take it all the way.
I completely agree. Okay, so I want to talk about Second Amendment in as public policy philosophically, but before I just want to make sure you still consider yourself a Democrat. You still generally
Yeah.
support the Democratic Party. You're not,
Yeah.
you know, or are you? I don't know. Let me know. I mean, have you
No,
moved to the
I'm a
Republican
Democrat. I'm a Democrat.
You're a Democrat, solid Democrat. You support Democrats. Are you involved with the party, either local or state or federal, or?
So since I left office, the main role that I've gone from is gone from somebody who asks people for help to somebody who people ask help for or
Yeah,
from.
yeah.
So I get a lot of calls for fundraising. People ask me for my endorsement, for mentoring, for helping them shepherd through the process of running for office. And so that's my main way that I've stayed involved in politics.
Okay, so you are, and the point I want to get across to folks that are listening, you're a Democrat. You're not kind of a Democrat, or you didn't used to be a Democrat, or you aren't less of a Democrat than, you're a Democrat. You're a solid blue Democrat.
Yep.
Okay, so talk to me about the Second Amendment. First off, try to explain, where do you stand on the Second Amendment in general, and then maybe let's start talking a little bit more about some of the public policy, surrounding the Second Amendment in California. So philosophically, where are you on the Second Amendment?
Well, so my favorite class in law school was constitutional law, and I got the highest grade in the state for constitutional law 1 and constitutional law 2. And those are the two con law classes that folks have to take. And I'm always amazed when people read one or two of the first 10 amendments in the Bill of Rights, but they kind of ignore other ones. And of course, the Second Amendment is a major part of the Bill of Rights. It was placed second. It was placed second for a reason. The most interesting thing that I've had to do with respect to the Second Amendment is I have a friend. He's a very, very smart guy, very accomplished in life, very wealthy, just a terrific guy. He wrote a book about the Second Amendment, and he took a position that was different from my beliefs, and I'm guessing different from yours. And he asked me to edit the book, and he asked me to write a foreword to the book. And I did for months and months and months. We went back and forth, and we looked into like colonial gun laws and like all sorts of different things, and what it meant to be a member of the militia, and all these different angles. And I actually left with a stronger belief in the Second Amendment than I had, by having to argue with a guy who was very much against the modern conception, or the pro-gun conception of the Second Amendment. And so my understanding of it came from studying constitutional law. My understanding has deepened the more that I drill into it, and it's been a fascinating journey.
So I think people can have a strong opinion on the Second Amendment and the Constitution, and fully understand what the framers were intending, and support, a lot of freedom and liberty when it comes to gun ownership, and still not personally be aligned with with what the Second Amendment protects. Would you say that you personally think that it is a good idea in 2025 that the individuals, citizens of the United States, or people in the United States, should preserve and have the right to keep and bear arms?
Yeah, for law-abiding citizens, that's an easy answer. The challenge that I think we face as a society is what to do with criminals, right? I mean, that's the toughest thing. I try to point out to people, especially demagogues who are always talking about so-called assault rifles, that most crime in the United States is committed by people who have handguns. Handguns are easy to smuggle. They're easy to conceal. I think even if, some people got their way and the Second Amendment was banned, criminals would still have handguns. I mean, this is a fact, right?
Yeah.
And so I try to view things as, what can we do as a society to make sure that everybody has a sense of community, that everybody feels like they are engaged, that young men have opportunities, that if you are noticing somebody at your church, at school, in your community, where you're thinking that that person feels like they might be planning something or doing something that is not right, or that they're going through a mental health crisis, that it's incumbent on each of us to step up. That the issue is way, way more complicated than the Second Amendment. It's an issue of pharmaceutical use. It's an issue of lack of community, lack of opportunities. These are things that I think play into it, just besides the Second Amendment analysis.
So, do you, when you talk to people who are aligned with you in other political viewpoint, or basically when you talk to anybody who's a part of the Democratic Party,
Right.
whether they were colleagues up in Sacramento or your buddy who was writing a book, or just folks at a cocktail party, what do you think the most misunderstood part of the Second Amendment and gun ownership is, in Democratic Democratic voters?
That's a really easy answer, and I would say there's two things. So the first one is the whole musket idea, right? I'm sure you've heard that a bazillion times.
Right, that there were only muskets, and that's
Yeah. That the technology froze in 1799 or something, and 1789. Of course, there's an easy riposte to that, and that is the First Amendment protects podcasts, protects the internet. It protects technologies that did not exist when the drafters framed the First Amendment. So that's an easy one. And I think even people, once they say it, they kind of can be made to realize how stupid that sounds pretty quickly. The second misconception is a little bit deeper, and that's the militia conception. Right? And what I try to explain to people, that even if you think it just protects people who are part of the militia, that at the time that this was drafted, any citizen could become a member of the militia and own a gun. And so I don't see why even people think of that as a silver bullet. Now, at the time that the Second Amendment was drafted, to be a member of the militia, you had to be a white male who owned property. That was what citizenship was. But now that's not what citizenship is. Anybody over the age of 18 is a citizen. And, if you imagine a world where they said, well, you have to be a member of the militia to own a gun, I think half the states in the union would just say, all right, so join the militia. Right? Anybody over the age of it was to make it, I don't want to make it sound more easy than it was at the time the Second Amendment was drafted, but becoming a member of the militia was almost like registering to vote. It was seen as a civic duty, a civic option and a civic duty. You want to register to vote? Want to be a member of the militia? Go for it. And so these people who think that would become this silver bullet, I think that's also based on a misunderstanding. And then the third thing that I'll say is that owning a gun in those times, particularly for people who lived in the frontier states, it was like owning a phone today or owning a computer.
Yeah.
Like you couldn't imagine life without it. It was an appliance. It was something you used to feed your family, to protect your livestock. I mean, it was something that was part of your daily life. You might even carry it with you at all times, like a phone. And so when they say, well, why aren't there more restrictions? And it's like, well, that would be like looking at our moment in time and saying, why don't they have restrictions on owning computers? I don't think most people could fathom if someone said you've got to register your computer. They'd say, what are you talking about? Like, it would be such a weird thing. That is what gun ownership was when the time the Second Amendment was drafted. And I hope that makes sense.
It makes a lot of sense. So I want to talk a little bit about, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, and tell me if you remember, but I believe that gun violence restraining orders came to be while you were in office. Do you recall?
I don't think so. I feel like they're older than my tenure, but I could be wrong. There could have been some expansion. You know a lot, so I mean, it's totally possible.
So you don't remember voting on it up or down?
I mean, let's put it this way.
I don't, but by the way, this isn't a gotcha question. I don't have the information in front. I started thinking. Here's what I want to get to, Mike. So, gun violence restraining orders, as you know, are basically they were sold to the voters as, and I don't know how much you know about gun violence restraining orders, but they were sold to the voters as, hey, if there's a lack of law, if there's a lack of policy out there, and somebody is clearly showing signs of danger, then a gun violence restraining order will kind of be a last resort in order for law enforcement to step in and at least try to prevent something from happening. You know, if somebody is doing something that's not quite really, they're not sure if they can really arrest this person or prosecute this person, but gee, they can at least take their guns away until they prove that this person is not a threat to himself or herself or others. That's how it was sold to the voters. And then it was implemented, and everybody said, "Oh my gosh, this is going to be the best thing ever," and you know, look how great this is. But since it was implemented, it has not been this kind of gap filler. It hasn't been used as a last resort. It's been used as standard operating procedure. In other words, if law enforcement does anything, you know, has any kind of arrest or interaction, practically just, you know, some kind of official interaction, and somebody has a firearm, then, you know, you can almost bet on the fact that there's going to be a gun violence restraining order involved. And I've seen people who were actually victims, and you know, and it come to find out they had a firearm, and boom, a gun violence restraining order was filed. And I've seen people who, you know, roommates who've gotten into, you know, arguments, and one of the roommates decided to, you know, file a gun violence restraining order on the other, and they've been used, you know, predatorily, I guess. And I'm just curious, how much do you know about gun violence restraining orders? And is there anything you have to say about them, or you know, you know, are you aware that they're being abused? Do you have any experience with them at all?
No, so the answer is I don't have much experience with them at all. When I was in the legislature, I remember many different debates on gun issues. This is not one that I remember being a huge one. There was a big debate about giving the Attorney General the ability to seize the backlog of people who supposedly were supposed to have their guns taken away, but they never got taken away.
Right.
That was a very, very and I think it was just a funding issue. And I want to say there were like 50,000 Californians that were supposed to have guns taken away, and they hadn't been, or something like that. With restraining orders generally, I think the system is in need of some reform, particularly for two classes of restraining orders, whether they pertain to guns or anything else. The first is if somebody lies. We need to preserve the ability for people to feel like they can step forward and get a restraining order. But at the same time, if somebody lies in your circumstance, where the example you gave, where somebody is using it as a weapon,
vindictive,
then that person should be prosecuted for perjury. There should be very, very clear consequences when somebody does something like that. The second thing is, you know, I think the standard of proof should be a little bit higher than just, gee, this is what I think. It's very rare in this country that we allow somebody to have a penalty when somebody just feels something or thinks something. But with restraining orders, that's often the case. And I think there should be some degree of law enforcement involvement where there's some evidence for most of these restraining orders to go forward.
So if you were going to give advice to someone who's passionate about the Second Amendment, a gun owner, an activist who's passionate about the Second Amendment, if you were going to advise them on how to relate to, how to convince, or how to talk to somebody who you know, isn't a fan of the Second Amendment or isn't a fan of gun ownership, what's your advice? How do you break through? How do you convince them, or what resonates with them that maybe wouldn't resonate with someone who's pro Second Amendment? You know, what would you say to them?
Great question. So what I tell everybody right now is do not underestimate how polarized the country is. Do not underestimate how much people are going to stereotype you for having a belief because the belief is different from theirs. They might automatically assume because somebody is a gun owner that person is a bigot, or that person is you know, a far right activist or something. I think the best way to start out without being defensive is just to say, look, I'm a regular person. This is what I believe. I believe in protecting my family. I believe in protecting my business. And that's a core Right. It's the right of self-defense. It's to, you could argue that that right predates the Constitution, that it's a natural right. It's something that everybody has. And, I think you start there, you personalize it. And if they get into a discussion about the Second Amendment, and I'm talking some of the things we talked about framing and militia thing, or the musket thing, just be prepared to give them a couple replies, maybe 2 sentences that explain better the historical context. And I think that's the best way to do it. Just stay calm and point out to them too that there are lots and lots of Democrats who believe in the Second Amendment.
Okay, and last question. Why should Democrats change their position or evolve their position on Second Amendment?
Well, for starters, because it's the right thing to do. I mean, it is something that I believe. Look, I don't agree with Clarence Thomas's opinion. I think there are other ways to get at it. But I think the core of the Second Amendment, there is a truth there. There is a historical truth. There's a constitutional truth. There is a moral truth. And so you can start by you could almost end the discussion there, that Democrats should do the right thing because it's the right thing to do. But from a pragmatic standpoint as well, I think that in a society where property crime is on the rise, in a society where police budgets are strained and response times are going up all across the state, people feel more intensely aware of their need to protect themselves. And so from a practical standpoint, we're going to lose voters if we make people feel bad for protecting themselves.
Good answers. We're out of time. I got to tell you though, you got to come back on.
Sure.
You can't throw out at the end of the interview. You can't throw out I don't agree with Justice Thomas. That's a whole. We got to have a whole discussion. I would love to hear your thoughts on that, but we're out of time. So I got to have you back on, and we got to talk about that. I really appreciate this interview, and I appreciate you reaching out. And I thought it was fascinating. So thank you so much for making the time. If people want to know more about you or want to follow you, is there anything you want to promote or talk about?
No, I mean, look, people can find me on X at Mike Gatto, as long as they spell my last name right, Gatto. They can also find me on MikeGatto.com, but I'm not promoting anything.
Okay, great. Well, thanks, Mike. What a pleasure. Thank you so much for being on the show. Having me. All right, man.
Take care.
Bye. Hey, thanks for watching Gun Owners Radio. I hope you loved that clip. Don't forget to like, subscribe, comment, and follow us on social media, and check out our website at gunownersradio.com.